What's up, history buffs? I'm your adorable and awkward host, Robert Tijerina, and welcome to History 101, the only show that tries a little too hard to make history just as interesting as it was. Welcome to the first episode, and I bet you're wondering what exactly this is. Well, History 101 is my attempt to give you as much information about a specific topic in as little amount of time, because I know we're all busy people, and now that that's taken care of, class is in session. Today, and our first topic is the Founding Fathers versus slavery. Yes, we all know the Founding Fathers. We learn about them from 5th grade until we finally get rid of them in college. But even then, we're always surrounded by them. Whether it's statues, high schools, or even the money that we use, we're always surrounded by them. Kind of like mosquitoes or the Kardashians. These guys fought for our freedom, created our government, and did some pretty awesome things. But how did they deal with slavery?
We know there was slavery that was still tolerated when the nation began. But we also know that the very founders that wrote those documents worked tirelessly until slavery was no more in the United States.
That was Michelle Bachmann, a Minnesota congresswoman who ran for the Republican presidential nomination in 2012. And I'm sorry to break it to you, but no, they didn't. The Founding Fathers didn't actually do anything about slavery. In fact, they did quite the opposite. Well, not all of them turned a blind eye. Only like 2 of the Founding Fathers actually fought against it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get there. Let's just begin with overall slavery. By 1784, the states of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut had all either abolished slavery or had begun to pass laws to push back against it. Meaning that 5 out of 13 states actually abolished it. Which sounds nice, but if a doctor told you the surgery was a complete success, 5 of your 13 vital organs actually work, you wouldn't say, "Good job, doc, you did really well." You'd say, "Put on those scrubs, gas me up, and get back in there." So there was still a long way to go. We'll start with the Founding Father that actually fought against abolition. The first one on our list, Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was a big player in abolition. Franklin was an American statesman, one of the Founding Fathers, and the dude on the $100 bill that I never get to see because I'm a poor college student. When he was younger, Franklin actually worked in the slave trade business. He printed ads for slave auctions and actually owned 1 or 2 slaves at a time. It wasn't actually until he got older and actually started resembling an old decaying pumpkin that he actually got involved with the abolition of slavery. He became an active member of the Philadelphia Abolition Society and even wound up being the president of that society. He continued his work until finally the Constitutional Convention. Next up, George Washington. Well, he's George Washington. Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, President of the Constitutional Convention, and first President of the United States. So if you haven't heard of him, where have you been? Also, fun fact, the wooden teeth thing, completely false. They're made out of ivory. So if someone ever tells you that they have a pair of wooden teeth at home, it's probably just a terrible sexual innuendo. Now, George Washington was actually a slave owner. An avid one. Being a Virginia plantation owner, Washington owned quite a bit of slaves. And I bet you're wondering, about how many? 15, 20, 25? Nope, by the beginning of the Revolutionary War, George Washington owned almost 100 slaves. So I guess you could say that George Washington had 99 problems, but his slaves' freedom wasn't one. Yes, I know that almost 100 is quite a lot, but it gets kind of worse. By 1786, good old Georgie owned about 200 slaves. In Ron Chernow's biography of Washington, he claims that Washington himself was a benevolent master, which to me is kind of an odd statement, like an oxymoron. Like jumbo shrimp, it's a big small thing. Well, George Washington was kind of like a good, bad guy. But the main reason why he had so many slaves wasn't because he had so much land. It was because he didn't want to separate any families. So he would buy every single person in one family for slaves. So I guess we could call him Good Guy George. As president though, Washington really didn't do anything. But there are records that show that he disliked the idea of slavery. He himself even wrote, "There is not a man living who wishes more sincerely than I do to see a plan adopted for the abolition." Which is a nice sentiment if he spoke it out loud instead of writing it down on a piece of paper. Before his death, Washington did something that most people didn't. He wrote in his will that all of his slaves should be freed, and a majority of his wealth should be divided between all the slaves so they can start bread new lives. So, go him. Next up, John Adams. Member of the Continental Congress, 2nd President of the United States, and a person you pay so little attention to that you didn't realize that is not John Adams. This is John Adams. Adams, unlike Washington, actually owned no slaves. Not a single one. So good on you, Johnny. While he was still a lawyer, Adams spoke out against slavery, calling it a foul contagion of human character. As a lawyer, he defended slaves, but as he was promoted to president, he hushed down any of his abolition views. He was worried the South might rise up against him and turn down any of his plans for the freedom of slavery. And this is really a constant theme for the presidents to come. James Madison. Now, Madison was the framer of the U.S. Constitution, 4th President of the United States, and yes, I did skip someone, but I promise I'll get to it. Madison was a master of over 120 slaves. 120! That's as many people in the Turkish legislature. No one should own as many people as it takes to govern a country. Now, Madison didn't actually buy his slaves. He inherited them, like a good man. Madison was considered a generous slave owner. He told his overseers that they should, quote, treat the Negroes with as much humanity and kindness consistent with their necessary subordination and work. Yes, that is sort of a nice sentiment, but the dude that helped coin "we the people" just called us equals a derogatory term. Now, Madison did not morally support slavery, yet when he was president, he dodged a subject like the US voted Ebola. The next person on our list is Alexander Hamilton. Yes, Hamilton. First Treasury of the Secretary, Colonel in the Continental Army, and now star of his own hit Broadway show. There's no joke for that one, I just really liked it. Now, Hamilton was surrounded by slavery in his home island of Nevis, which was actually a slave trade outpost. After coming to America and fighting in the Revolution, Hamilton dedicated a majority of his life to abolition. Hamilton helped create the New York Manumission Society. The New York Manumission Society is a society that helped protect free slaves in the North. Get this. Southerners would actually go up to New York, claiming that they lost slave, and actually pull one of the free African Americans from the street and sell them into slavery. Which, contrary to popular belief, is pretty messed up. It's not like finding a puppy on the side of the road. You can't just keep a human being. Along with Ben Franklin, Hamilton was actually for putting the abolition of slavery in the Constitution. Hamilton overall was very vocal in all of his opinions, whether it's his political enemies or his abolition of slaves, which is probably why he got shot in 1804. So there goes that good guy. The last person on my list is who else but Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was the third president of the United States, primary author of the Declaration of Independence, and a huge slave owner. I'm talking big league people. TJ owned almost 200 slaves, which yes, that does mean that Washington did own more slaves than Thomas Jefferson, but does it really matter? Now, I'm not saying that owning less slaves than George Washington makes him a better person, because it doesn't. It's kind of like owning nuclear weapons. It's not about how many they have, it's about that they have them. Jefferson, like Madison, also disliked the idea of slavery. Jefferson himself even wrote, "There is nothing I would not sacrifice to a practical plan of abolishing every vestige of this moral and political depravity," which basically translates to, hey, I don't like it either. Something that most people don't actually know is that Jefferson also wanted to add the abolition of slavery in the Constitution. In fact, during the Revolution, Jefferson actually supported a plan to abolish slavery, and he blamed King George III, the King of England at the time, for the slave trade. Which really isn't a fair thing to say. Yes, King George did instigate slave trade, but he didn't force your hand to your pocket and say, 200 slaves, please. It doesn't work like that. In 1780, Jefferson actually laid out a plan to end slavery, slowly. But when he became president, his views got more radical, and he still wanted abolition of slavery, but he wanted to ship them back to Africa. Which again, TJ, doesn't work like that. You can't just be like, hey, thanks for our hard work. I know we're terrible, but, see ya. Most of the slaves are actually born in the US, so sending them back to Africa would be like sending a dachshund into a pack of wolves. They don't really fit in, you just pray that they don't get themselves hurt. Jefferson was actually discovered to having an affair with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. After having several children with her, it came kind of hard to hide the fact that he did. In fact, after he passed away, he only released a handful of his slaves. Most of them were actually the Hemings families. Now, our founding fathers are pretty flawed. So are we. That's what makes us human. To study history, we have to realize that. Remember that New York Manumission Society I talked about with Hamilton? Well, a majority of the people in that society actually owned slaves. People like John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the United States, owned slaves, but he was still a part of it. Everyone in that society that owned slaves is basically like, yeah, this slavery thing is bad, but not my slaves, they're fine. As messed up as slavery is, we can understand why they avoided the subject for so long. The subject of slavery was so controversial that it would have held back any initial progress for the new Constitution. South Carolina and Georgia even said that they wouldn't even look at the new Constitution if it had anything to do with slavery. So you could see what kind of pressure these people were up against. And with the lack of this constitution, it would have created a terrible and uncomfortable gap between all the states, which might have led to a civil war before. With that being said, there is the other side where it was held off for far too long, that it was the major cause of the Civil War in 1860. But again, I understand that the Founding Fathers had things to do and things that they couldn't do at the same time. With that being said, we have to understand that there had to be some things that were sacrificed in the original Constitution so that it can get passed to create the country that we live in now. But that's just my opinion. This leads me to the question of the day. What do you think about the Founding Fathers now that you know a little bit more about the struggles that they went through? Now that you have a little bit more knowledge on the topic, do you think that the Founding Fathers made the right idea? Or do you think that they should have done it from the very get-go? I'd be really interested to hear what y'all guys said. Throw your comments down below so we can start a discussion. Thank you guys so much for watching, and class is dismissed.